Good evening, everyone. Welcome. This is Rudy Machiello, and you're watching another episode of Crossing the T's. If this is your first time, guys, please don't forget to hit subscribe, the subscribe button at the end of this episode. And also, don't forget to hit the like button if you liked this episode. Once again, I'm Rudy Machiello, and you're watching Crossing the T's, okay? If this is the first time you're watching this show, Crossing the T's is a 30-minute talk about how linguistics support our classroom practices. If you want to interact with us, if you want to ask questions, if you want to just make a comment, use the chat box. The chat box is here for you guys, okay? So don't be afraid. Use the chat box, interact with us, ask your questions, and we're going to have a great episode. We depend on you to have a great episode. And tonight's episode is why reading out loud is not effective. So this is I, I don't think this is just another controversial topic, but it's quite controversial. I know that many of you language teachers, English teachers, second language teachers, you have your students read texts out loud. Um, but is that really effective? I mean, if we want to focus on the language or if you want to focus on the message that the text is bringing, is reading out loud really, really effective? Well, hopefully, we're going to address this issue in the next 30 minutes. So please feel welcome, enjoy the show, and please use the chat box to interact with us. Okay, guys? So, um, for starters, hopefully this is readable. Hopefully you're going to be able to read this highlighted part or the part in yellow. So I'm going to give you guys around a minute and a half, so you can take a look at this highlighted yellow part of the text that I have here on the screen. But please read it out loud. Even if you're in your house, even if you're not alone, that's okay. Some people are going to think that you're not feeling well, there's something wrong going on with you, but that's okay. I'm going to give you guys 1.5 minutes to read this highlighted yellow part out loud, okay? Okay, guys, you had a minute or so to take a look at this highlighted yellow part here. Hopefully you read out loud. Hopefully nobody's going to think you guys are crazy. Or if they do, that's okay. So you read it out loud. Okay, guys? So now I have some questions for you. My question is, if you had to, what kind of notices will you see on Facebook based on this paragraph, based on this highlighted part here? What kind of notices will you see on Facebook from now on? And why? So if you guys had to take a quick look back at what you have just read, then you already know how your students feel when you have them read something out loud, okay? Because that's what they normally do. I don't know if this happens to you guys. It's happened to me, and it's still happening to me. Whenever I don't do that anymore. I haven't been doing this, but uh, whenever they are students, my students read something out loud, and then I for some reason forget to tell them, oh no, you're not supposed to read this out loud. You can read it silently. Um, and then I ask the questions, or when I repeat the question, And then they say, oh, teacher, okay, so let me take a look at that paragraph or at the text again because I don't remember. So that's how they feel. If you had the same reaction a couple of seconds ago, so that's exactly what your students do. Whenever you have them read something out loud, and then you ask a question, or when you repeat the question, they are going to be like, oh, give me 30 more seconds, or give me 1 more minute so I can take a look at the paragraph because I don't remember uh, what I'm supposed to answer. uh, and why does this happen? Because there's a reason for this to happen, because there's a lot um, to 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 take care of. um, when our students are reading out loud, they have to pay attention to sounds, sound patterns. They have to pay attention to the articulation of the words. They have to pay attention to um, concept association, understanding, semantic aspects, grammar aspects. A lot of things is going. A lot of things is going on here, so that they have to focus on on a lot of stuff. They have to focus on a lot of stuff. That's why it's so hard for them to actually read something out loud, read a text out loud, and then answer an interpretation question. Okay? And why does this happen? Well, let's take a look at this schema by Norman Sigalowitz. Okay, this is in this book from 2010. Um, if we're going to, of course, you may ask me, you may tell me actually, Rudy, first, Rudy, it's too small. Can you make it big? Yes, I can. Here it is. Okay, it's bigger. Hopefully, it's easier to read it now. So the first thing you're going to tell me is, Rudy, this is related to speech. Yes, it's related to speech, but it's possible to make some transfer, some associations here. All right, especially if you go backwards, because in this case here, both are being exposed to the language, whether they're being exposed to a spoken language or a written language, but they're being exposed to a language here. So let's go backwards, because the order, according to Segalowitz, the order of um, how we actually understand or how we receive language, it's like this. Okay, this is the order. All right, or even better, this is the order. Okay, but if we go backwards, okay, from this part upwards, we're going to notice a lot of similarities when we talk about reading and why reading out loud is really, really hard. But anyway, so let's focus here. Uh, Whenever we're reading something and we're being exposed to a written language here, what we have here is not overt speech, okay? But when we read out loud, we have to think about the articulation. So, yes, when we're reading out loud and there's a bunch of words, we have to think about that before we actually say the words, before we actually produce. And we have air quotes here because we're not actually producing, we're just repeating the words. But anyway, it's not the case here, it's not the discussion here. But whenever we are uttering, producing, or saying the word, we have to think ahead about articulation, the articulation of the word. And then we have to move on to the phonetic aspects, the phonetic issues. This is also very, very important when we're reading out loud, because we have to think about the articulation, like, okay, how do I say these words? And then the phonetic aspect of reading something out loud, which is, what are the sounds that I have to produce here? So this is all going on in our minds before we actually read something out loud. It's a lot to take. It's a lot to take care of. Okay? And then once we're done with the phonetic encoding or with the phonetic issue, we go for the morphophonological part aspect of it. Okay, like, okay, I'm reading these words. Do I know that word? Which is completely related to syllabary. And I have to call the attention to LX and LY. because this is the part that I have to call the attention to. It's knowledge of external, LX, knowledge of external, LY, knowledge of internal world. In other words, external knowledge, internal knowledge. And if we go back to syllabary here, what we have is LX, LY, and this mid part here, this intersection, is what we're going to bring to the table once, or what our students are going to bring to the table once they have to read whatever piece of writing out loud. Okay? So when we talk about morphophonological issues, they're going to face the word and they'll have to very fast, they'll have to think, okay, do I know this word? Okay, ly, ly. Do I know this word? Yes, I know this word. And when I say do I know this word, is like, do I know how to actually do I know how to actually pronounce this word? That's the first, not the meaning, because when we're reading out loud, we're not focusing on meaning. Look, there's nothing related to meaning in this first part of the schema here that Segalowitz is proposing. All right. So, do I know this word? Meaning, do I know how to pronounce it? So it's ly. Okay, internal knowledge. External knowledge. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce it, but based on the words that I've already been exposed to, I think the pronunciation of this word, based on the spelling of this word, it's similar to some other words that I already know. So I think the pronunciation is going to be like this. It's going to be like that. This is all happening before our students, milliseconds before our students actually start reading something out loud. That's why it's not fair having our students read something out loud. It's a lot to take care of. It's a lot. Seriously. It's too much. Too much. So, and again, we're not focusing, going back to the schema here, we're not focusing on any semantic nor pragmatic aspect of the text. We're not, basically, in other words, we're not focusing on the message. And the message is really important. That's why I'm asking you, what about understanding? Yes, what about understanding? Because after going through all these tips, uh, of course, the focus is not going to be on the information that the text is giving us. Um, and of course, our students are going to take a quick look back at the text once we repeat the question, because normally our questions are, how do you pronounce these words in line 2, paragraph 3? Um, no, our questions are normally, um, what does this number refer to? Or something more linguistic, what does the word it refer to? Or um, what does the author want to convey with this sentence? So it requires our students actually interpret the text. So once again, what about understanding? It's not the focus if we have our students read out loud, okay? Because again, there's a lot that they have to focus on, and they basically they lock out the meaning aspect, or the semantic aspect of the text, okay? And this brings me to another question. Why do we read? Yes, why do we read in our daily lives? Why do we um, why do we open our books, or why do we read blogs? Why do we read newspapers, magazines? Why do we read academic articles? Why do we read? Well, we read for fun, we read for pleasure, we read for information, for duty. Sometimes it's our duty. If you have to revise texts, if this is your job, you're reading because you have to. It's your job to revise or to review texts. We read for learning purposes too. Whenever we read an article, for example, whenever we assign an article to our students, we expect what? We expect our students to actually take a look at this article and maybe get some new vocabulary, new words. They're going to be exposed to new words. So, you know, for that. But For whatever reason, for whatever the reason is, none of them is related to pronunciation. We're reading for pleasure. It's not related to pronunciation. We're reading for information. It's not related to pronunciation. We're reading for learning new words. When you learn new words, it's not related to pronunciation, not directly linked to pronunciation. It's linked to meaning, not the pronunciation. The pronunciation is coming afterwards. That's why our students, when they interrupt their reading, they say, Teacher, what does this word mean? Or what's the meaning of this word? They ask for the meaning and not the pronunciation. Okay? And um, by doing that, if we have our students actually read something out loud, especially if you have a group, all right, regardless of their age, if we have our students read whatever text out loud, the following is going to happen. So there's a big chance that um, they are going to not know the pronunciation of a certain word. So let's suppose that in the article they have the word sluggish. All right. So they're reading a piece of article, they're reading a text, and in the middle of this text they have there's this word sluggish, and they don't know the pronunciation of sluggish. So if you have your students read something out loud, they're not going to know, oh, I don't know this word, I don't know how to pronounce this word. And then what's going to happen? Their emotions are going to be all over the top because they're going to be nervous. Like, oh my God, I have to read this. But what if I don't know the pronunciation of this word? And my teacher is asking me to read something out loud. And what if I make a mistake? Everybody's going to make fun of me. So they are going to be discouraged. They are going to be, our students are going to basically be disengaged even before they read it. Because maybe they know, maybe they try to guess the pronunciation and they guess it right. But before that, we're going to have all this hassle going on here. And this extra hassle is what? Understanding the message. Because look, pronunciation, emotions. It's a lot to take. It's a lot going on in our students' minds. And we also ask them to interpret the text. So this is the extra hassle. Like, my goodness, teacher, why do you hate me so much? What did I do to you? You know, and we know that that's not what we want, because basically what we really want, the goal of having our students read whatever article or whatever text we have, is for the understanding of it. That's why we ask them. I don't like this question, but that's why we basically ask them. Do you understand it? You know. So bottom line, remember, one of the reasons why we read something, we read comic books. I'm a huge fan of comic books. I still have collections. I keep my collections in order and updated. So why do I read that? Because I want to have fun, and also some information, because um, many comic books, many of the issues of comic books, they're also related to something that's going on in the world, but mainly for fun. And look, if if they don't know how to pronounce words, and this is making them nervous, where's the fun in that? You know, where's the fun in that? There's no fun. There's no fun. And and besides all of this, we also have to interpret. So no, there's definitely no fun in having our students read whatever writing, whatever text, actually, out loud. Okay? And this brings me to what Scrivener wrote in one of his books, Learning Teaching, if I'm not wrong, from to the 2011, of course. Because when whenever our students don't know certain words, you know, they are going to basically say, okay, I give up, you know, um, I give up. I can't read it. So that's why reading should be something silent, a moment that our students are actually going to interact with the text. Remember in the very first, in the second slide actually that we talked about a couple of minutes ago, we use our internal and external knowledge. Yes, we do. Also for interpreting. Whenever we have to interpret a text, of course, we're going to use our world knowledge, internal and external, what we already possess, and something that something that I know from the world based on observations, whatever. So this this may sound a little bit um, lonely. It's a lonesome um, uh, activity when we read because it's us, the text. Yes, in part, yes. It is a little bit lonesome, but it's important because then they'll have to, okay, so I don't understand certain words, but I'm not going to give up understanding the whole context. I'm not going to give up understanding the entire line or the paragraph or whatever. Let me take a look at what I know. Let me take a look at different words. Let me take a look at the whole paragraph uh, because then maybe I know that. Okay, and and this brings me to certain types of activities, reading activities, because we do have basically two types of activities, reading activities. We have intensive and extensive reading activities. Um, let's start with the extensive type of reading activities. Okay, guys. So, in when we practice extensive reading here, we are basically going to read for what? For general understanding or for pleasure. We're not getting into the details mainly, the details. All right, and we have two subcategories for extensive reading. All right, we're going to have skimming and scanning, skimming and scanning. If we skim the text, we're going to look for basic ideas, general ideas, basic structure if we consider the language, if we're going to ask questions related to the language. So nothing very complex. And if we go for scanning activities, we're going to focus on specific information, all right? But both are extensive because we're not necessarily going to read the entire article. It's something more, a little bit more dynamic. All right, okay. And then we have what? Intensive reading, of course. What is intensive reading? Intensive reading is when we want to focus on the details. Uh, it's something more complex. All right. Oh, something more complex. Yes, something more complex because you're going to ask questions like a summary of an entire paragraph, or if you have a text with like two, three paragraphs, not necessarily long paragraphs, but two or three paragraphs, and you want your students to actually give you a summary of these of the whole text. So yeah, I need to read everything thoroughly because then I'm going to pick up some information, some details, the important details that I'm going to use when I'm giving the summary. All right. And, uh, and also, very important, reading is the moment where students are going to find complex structures, complex words. Why? Based on Lightbound and Spada, um, um, they from a book, How Languages Are Learned from 2013. Okay, uh, when we communicate orally, we don't make use of complex structures or complex words. We're basically limited, or we limit ourselves um, with these 1,000 or 2,000 words tops. These are the most frequent words that we use when we communicate orally. Why? Because it's simpler, it's dynamic, it's fast, and we want to be understood. More importantly, we want to be understood. So whenever we're engaged in a conversation, that's what we're going to do. We're going to use certain amount of words, that the group of words that we normally do, because depending on the person you're engaged in a conversation with, this person is going to be you're going to share the world with this person. So this person probably understands the same amount of words that you use, and this person is going to use probably the same number of words, etc., etc., etc. Complex structures and words are going to appear in written texts, in articles, books, editorials, etc., etc. So that's why reading is so important, because whenever we have our students reading, we want them to be exposed to more complex and more sophisticated structures, words, style, etc., etc., etc. Right? And of course, they are going to incorporate this style. They are going to incorporate the words. They're going to incorporate the grammar, and they're going to find a way, a situation in which they can actually produce it orally. All right, but they are only going to be. There's a big chance actually that they're going to be exposed to this sophistication, this linguistic sophistication when they read. And again, if it's too complex, and not too complex, but if it's complex, if it's sophisticated, there's a big chance that if you have them read out loud, again, they're not going to focus on this. It's all about phonetics, it's all about sounds, it's all about articulations, and not necessarily grammar. Remember the schema that I showed you in the very beginning of this episode. There's nothing related to grammar, nothing related to semantics nor pragmatics, nothing related to that. Okay? It's all about reading out loud, it's all about phonetics, articulation, not even phonology. Okay? It's all about phonetics. The focus is there. So all these aspects of reading a complex or being exposed to um, um, of sophisticated language, all those aspects are going to be lost. All right. Uh, so again, the goal is to expose our students to this kind of reading so that they can improve and have a better repertoire, not only for language, but also for use of language. And also to interpret, because remember a couple of episodes ago, I said that language transcends, speech transcends the language. You know, this notion of language is has to go beyond the language. Whenever we have our students read something, whenever we assign a reading activity to our students, it has to go beyond the language. It's not just the language, it's the language and beyond. All right. um, and again, there is something that Scrivener wrote in his book, reading to oneself as opposed to reading out loud. And this is where I have to call the attention. It's not Rudy saying, it's Jem Scrivener, okay? As opposed to reading out loud is like listening, a receptive skill. Once again, it's not me, it's Jem Scrivener. I just happen to agree with him, all right? So, yes, whenever students are reading a text, it's a receptive skill. All right. And when they are engaged in reading out loud, uh, the message that the text is bringing, the text is carrying, goes to the background. It's in the background. And the phonetic aspects of the language goes to the foreground. It's at the surface. So they kind of suffocate the message in favor of or to benefit the phonetic aspect of the language. And that's not what we want. We want it to be a receptive skill. Receptive skill meaning that, okay, I'm going to receive some information and I'm going to interact with this information that the text is bringing, and not phonetic information. Okay, information, so to say. And something that also that Segalowitz also said in the same book that I showed you, the schema. Uh, whenever students are whenever they don't have linguistic knowledge, uh, they look for understanding elsewhere. They resort to different ways or to different places in order to understand whatever they were being exposed to, whatever linguistic aspect they were being exposed to, or linguistic feature they were being exposed to. Not phonetics. Again, we're talking about messages here. We're talking about semantics here. So they're being exposed to a message. Okay, I didn't quite get the message. Let me try to find something in my mind that will probably make me understand that. Again, it's not me, it's Norman Sgalowitz saying this. And I just happen to agree with Norman. I think he's also correct, you know. Uh, and that's why reading out loud is not very effective. It's not going to be effective if they're skimming. If they're skimming, why reading out loud? If they're scanning, why reading out loud? They're going to be focused on the phonetic aspects, and they're going to miss the detail. So no, that's not a good idea, especially because they're going to be focused on pronouncing the words correctly and not the chunks, not the meaningful chunks that we know that we have in in um, in texts. We do have meaningful chunks in texts. All right. And one more thing, one more thing. When you have your students read out loud, you're going to focus on pronunciation, not on interpretation. Okay, that's not what we want when um, we assign a reading a reading activity to our students. We want our students actually to be able to understand the language and understand the message that the language is bringing, is carrying with this is carrying in the text. Okay, guys. All right. And one more thing before we finish. I promise you guys I'm going to finish very, very soon because we're all hungry. Um, when our students have to deal with a lot of new information, something very interesting may occur. Cognitive overload. So they already have to deal with a new language. They already have to deal a language that they don't have full control of yet. They don't have full control over the language yet. It's something new for them. So they have to deal with all these two things. Um, they don't know a lot of words. They are still learning the words. Um, they don't know the meaning of certain words. When I say don't know the words, I'm not just talking about meaning, but also talking about the pronunciation of words. They have to deal with long sentences when they're reading a piece of writing. They have to convey information. Oh my God, a lot is going on here, and this may lead to cognitive overload. And whenever we have cognitive overload, our students are basically going to shut down. They're going to be like, okay, that's too much. Too much. We're going to see smokes coming out of their ears because it's going to be too much. Then learning is going to be extremely, extremely hindered. Okay? Woof. All right. Guys, this, wow, we talked a lot tonight, huh? Well, again, I hope you really, really, really liked this episode of Crossing the T's. I'd like to thank you so much. And once again, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please don't forget to do so because then you're going to have a notification whenever there's a new episode of Crossing the T's, or whenever there's a new video in the channel, you're going to be notified. Don't forget to hit like, thumbs up, right down here, thumbs up if you liked this video. And if you did like this video, please, please share this video. You can share in your social media, and you can use the hashtag leave the status quo. If you use the hashtag leave the status quo, we're going to be able to actually see you, find you, and we're going to be super happy to repost your posts, of course. Okay. So once again, I'm Rudy Mattiello. Thank you so much for joining. See you next time. Bye. Bye, guys.